How do I start a food truck business in California? And what licenses are needed to start a food truck in California? So welcome to YouTube's brand new food truck entrepreneur channel, Food Truck Freaks. In this video, we're actually going to cover the different costs and variations of permits and licenses you would need in order to start a food truck business in California. And if this is your first video, definitely welcome to our channel. We're not new to YouTube. This is actually our fourth food entrepreneur channel. Make sure you check out the links down below in the description section. We've got a lot of free resources for food truck entrepreneurs and links to our other YouTube channels. So now we're going to break this down into two parts. We're actually going to go over a variety of permits and licenses that you may need in the specific city and county that you're in. And then we're going to go over the costs, specifically the amounts of dollars, monies. How much does it cost to get these permits and licenses and even get a food truck up and running? Now, of course, there are a lot of variables when it comes to food truck entrepreneurship and running a food truck business. So these are going to be some rough estimates of what it's going to cost. Of course, I can't give you an exact amount because if you buy a brand new food truck and it's customized, you could be looking at $125,000 or more. Or if you bought a used food truck, you can get it for anywhere from 15 to 20 grand and then have it retrofitted and customized that way. So there's a lot of different variables, but the one thing that's pretty close to being accurate is the cost of the licenses and permits. Now, these are normally purchased and got at the local level, whether it's a city or county that you live in. So keep that in mind too. It's normally not necessarily the state that will issue these. The cities and counties have ordinances, rules, and regulations based on how they want food trucks to operate within city limits or the county limits. Now, the reason why I keep saying cities and counties is because two of them vary based upon where you're located. Okay, within the city, if you're within city limits, for instance, you may follow under different ordinances. If you live in a different county, that may be something that also, too, they can dictate what the permits and licenses cost as well as how they work. So first off, number one, seller's permits. So now in some cities, you'll need a seller's permit to allow food service operators to acquire the materials and supplies at wholesale cost without paying sales tax. So now what this is actually if you are purchasing either ingredients, you're purchasing proteins, if it's fish, meat, whatever it may be, any of the food products that you're ingredients, in essence, that you're purchasing, make sure you're not paying tax when you buy them. Because when you prepare the food and you sell it to a customer, that is the time when you actually collect the sales tax and then remit that to either the city, county, or the state. Normally, it's actually remitted to the state and they will dispense it to the cities and counties where the other sales tax would be collected from. But make sure that you're not paying sales tax twice on that, okay, guys? Next up is the fire certificate or fire inspection. So certain counties and cities not only have a health department, but also a fire department that will need to check your food truck. In most circumstances, this will only be required for vehicles that has any type of gas or propane culinary equipment. So if you're cooking on ranges that run with gas, even to be honest with you, not only just that, but propane and gas, but even the electrical work that's being done, making sure that it is up to code and that it's safe and it's done properly, you will have a fire inspection. And normally there's a fee included with that as well, which I think it's on an annual basis. It's between $75 to about $150. It's not very expensive, but it does take some time. The fire department will literally come to your truck or have you bring it to them. And they will walk through the entire thing and make sure that you've got even the right amount of fire extinguishers. I remember back when we had our retail bakery, we had the fire department locally here would inspect our bakery and then before we even opened up to sign off on it. And we had to have a certain amount of fire extinguishers, of course, fire exit signs and such. That's very similar to how it works with a food truck. But of course, you're just on a mobile unit itself. It's not something that's stationary. But they just want to make sure that your propane, if you have generators, of course, which you will, food truck generators run off of propane or gas. They want to make sure that it's also properly wired and put onto the unit itself securely and safely. Because you got to keep in mind when that is filled with propane or gas and you're transporting it back and forth to events, you've got that somewhere normally on the exterior of the vehicle. And if you're running off of generators, of course, some units actually have generators built into the unit itself. So it's not something that's on the outside or inside. It's actually built into the unit overall. So next one up is the parking permits. So believe it or not, you need to make sure you check with the city and county on where you're parking and you have the right parking permits. Some cities will require you to pay for a specific location and you are only allowed to be in that location at a certain designated time based upon what they tell you. So you need to be aware of that too. That's something that is going to be a fee. And normally the parking permits are set for a certain period of time. It's not like you buy it for an entire year and you can park wherever you want. Cities don't operate that way normally when it comes to food truck entrepreneurs and mobile food service. So make sure that you've got the right parking permit and you're in the right place at the right time. Now, if you're also doing catering, if you're going on private property, you need to make sure that you have parking permits and you are allowed to do that within the private property that you're going to be doing the event at. If you have someone who's in charge of the event, normally they will tell you, hey, the fee for this event is X, Y, Z. It could be $100, it could be a couple $100. But you want to make sure that you get those parking permits prior to going anywhere, because if you show up at a location, you don't have it, and you were asked to show that you've got a parking permit and don't have one, you can be fined or even potentially lose your license for your food truck. Next up is a commissary letter. Okay, so this is like a commercial kitchen. Cities and counties throughout the U.S. have actually begun to adopt a new rule, making sure that food trucks have a commissary kitchen or commercial kitchen that they are quote unquote attached to. And what I mean by that is that is your central kitchen location where food prep is worked. You get fresh water for the day for your unit. You can also throw out your old water that you've done after your event, get rid of your trash, sanitize your vehicle, basically close up shop for the day, but you have to be attached to or associated with a commissary kitchen. Now, with that being said, what's known as a commercial kitchen letter of agreement or commissary letter of agreement, that means that you have a contractual agreement with that specific location. And you will be required, normally you have to keep that with you on the vehicle that you're at, because again, if the health department shows up and does an inspection at random, or if any official or county official shows up and says, hey, do you have your letter of commissary? You need to make sure you have that with you. Next up is the SOP. This is a standard operating procedures document. This is actually something that's really good whether or not you're required to have this. If you're not, I would highly recommend you have one anyways. Here's the reason why. What this is actually an operating procedures guide for your food truck. So any employee that you hire or staff that you have on hand, you as the food truck owner are dictating to them, telling them, look, this is the procedures for us to prepare the food. This is how we clean up the truck every day. This is how we dispose of all of our water, our dirty water for the day, our trash, any other grease traps or anything grease related that we have to clean out, and we have to make sure the truck is sanitized. There is a procedure for that. So this standard operating procedures is something that you can show and kind of get every new employee on board, and they're all on the same page when it comes to keeping the food truck operating correctly, safely, and sanitized. So some counties, believe it or not, actually will require you to create one of these and have it on hand. And they even have it, in some cases, filed with the city or county that you live in. They have to keep it in the file for your specific food truck. Now next up, just briefly what I touched before, but special events permits. So as I mentioned, you might need to get a vending permit or a temporary authorization permit when you do a special event. I had just briefly mentioned, like if you're catering, for instance, but if you're doing like a wedding, if you're doing corporate events, any of those types of things where you have a special event specifically you are being paid to do, cities and counties may end up collecting a additional sales permit for that special events permit to allow you to operate there. Now that's aside from what I spoke about before. If you have someone who is in charge of the event, they may end up having you pay them a certain fee to be there. But this is a city or county ordinance and law that in most cases a special events permit will be needed. So keep that in mind too. Next up, of course, the traditional business license. You need to have a business license, obviously to operate your food business anywhere or any business of that type. And normally those you get those through the state. Your state will issue a business license to allow you to operate a business. And of course, the city and county, you want to make sure that you follow any additional permits or licenses with mobile food units, because they are also looked at differently than a brick and mortar food eatery of that sort. So you want to make sure that any additional permits that you would need to get in regards to a business license, you do as well. Next up is the EIN. This is an IRS number, the employer identification number. So for obviously tax purposes, when you begin to generate sales, you need to, and of course when you pay your employees or you pay some of your help, you need to make sure that you have an employer identification number. It's kind of like a business social security number in a sense. Now, if you create an LLC or based upon how you form your business, the business entity status, it could be a C Corp or an S Corp, or it could be any of those, but you still need to have an EIN. Those are simple to get. You can actually get them from the IRS website. I think they take about 10 minutes to get, and you get it almost instantly. Next up is, now this is a kind of a no-brainer. You might be thinking, well, what does that mean? Obviously, you need to have a valid driver's license. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, that's kind of silly. Why would that make your list? I know I need to have a license. Well, believe it or not, Everyone who drives your vehicle on the food truck needs to have a valid license. If you happen to not be there one day and your employee is driving your truck and he or she does not have a license on them, or even a valid license that hasn't expired, that's going to cause a big problem for you, because it's not his or her fault. It's actually going to be the food truck owner's fault. And you could potentially get a ticket, get a license revoked, or you can get your food truck even impounded in some worst case scenarios. But of course, if someone gets into an accident, you definitely want everyone who is driving that vehicle to make sure they have a valid driver's license. Now, food handler's permit, or known as a food handler's license or food management certificate. There's a lot of different terminologies for this one, but almost every single city and county will require you or the owner of the food truck to have one of these courses. I highly recommend, to be honest with you, if you're going into the food truck business, pay to have your employees just take this course. It's not rocket science, but it's also something that will help them understand the hygiene of food service, okay? Keeping things clean, and what temperature does food get kept at, how long can it be held, storing food products, fresh ingredients, preparation, keeping utensils clean. There's a lot that goes on to these food service. I've actually gone through these courses before when I was a supervisor for Starbucks, and then of course at Target, I ran their bakery and deli department, so I had to go through these courses myself. So I'm very familiar with what's on them and what's in them, and it's definitely something that's just more beneficial than anything. So make sure you have your employees take these courses, even if they're not even required by the city or county for you to have all of your employees on board. It's just great to have them educated, because it's only going to help you as far as serving clean, healthy food to your patrons, nobody getting sick and nobody having bad experiences with your food truck because food wasn't made correctly. So now let's dive into the fees. Starting a food truck in California, you're obviously going to need a couple of really expensive things to invest in. Number one, the food truck. So how much does a food truck cost is like the big question of the day, and it cannot be answered because there's too many variables. Now, the estimates are that you can spend anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 on a food truck. Do you necessarily need to buy a brand new one that's customized? Absolutely not. Believe it or not, there is in California, there's a ton of fantastic websites where you can buy used food trucks with the equipment on them ready to roll out, and just customize the exterior, put on a food truck wrap, and you create your own brand and put that on the truck, and they're ready to work, ready to go. Now, some of those trucks, you can get them from, like I said, even 15 to 20 grand. You can even get an ice cream truck for probably even less, depending upon all of the equipment. The type of food that you're going to prepare is what dictates the type of equipment you need. So the more involved your food preparation is for your food products, the more involved your menu is as far as how to make the product and prepare it, well, the more expensive it's going to be, because you're going to have specialized equipment, and it's going to be probably equipment that has to have maintenance on it on a regular basis. So that's going to cost you money as well. So at the end of the day, how much does a food truck cost is something that you really can't truly measure. Based upon your budget, I think is something that you would make a decision on how much you want to spend. Now, can you get a food truck loan for a food truck that hasn't started yet? You could, yes. But the thing of it is that banks and lending institutions don't look very fondly upon food truck ideas. They look on food trucks that are already existing and have cash flow, have revenue. So if you have good credit personally, you may end up wanting to tap into your own personal credit to get a food truck, to get a loan for that, because normally banks won't lend out money to a food truck that doesn't have proof of concept, meaning that you're not in the food truck industry yet. You're not turning any money. How much money have you made? Well, you haven't made anything because you haven't started yet. So like any business, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, when I had my Italian bakery, we were about 1.5 years, 2 years into it, and we started to turn a profit, and we were doing really well. So we actually created a business plan and sat down in front of 3 different banks, and nobody wanted to lend us money. Even though we were turning a profit and we had a good vision, a good idea, a good goal in mind for growing our business, they still said no, and that's even with good credit. So it's very challenging in the food industry to get a loan for something that hasn't even been proved yet. So definitely want to tap into your own credit for that. All right, permits, licensing, and insurance. So what is it that you need as far as getting started, Damien, in California? How much is a business license? So the business license, as I mentioned briefly, you could be looking at between $75 to $150. The vehicle registration itself, that would be for the food truck, would be also between about $80 to $200. And food service permit, this varies too, but this is also per year. This could be anywhere from $200 to up to $1,100 to $1,200. Your fire safety permit, as I mentioned, is probably one of the cheapest ones. It's around $150 to $175 annually. Again, that's something that's only renewed once a year, of course. Food truck license and permit as well, that's going to be about $300 to $600. Now, food truck parking and storage. This would be something that I mentioned before about the commissary kitchen or your commercial kitchen. You're looking at about $250 to $1,100 a month in some cases. Now, it could be less than that, but I don't think you're going to get a place that's obviously less than $200 or $250 a month. If you go to events, like I mentioned before, per event, when you get a special permit for those types of events, can be about $600 to $700 per event. And then insurance. The basic liability insurance coverage for a food truck, of course, it depends upon what you add on to the policy. And of course, I'm not an insurance agent, but the average insurance is around $1,500 to $1,600 on the low end, up to about $3,500 per year on the high end. Okay. So now, supplies that you would need in the kitchen as far as your food truck's concerned for the first couple of months, you need to factor in, obviously, your ingredients. The food itself, your small wares, which would be napkins, disposable forks, plates, cups, containers, food containers, lids, all of these little things. To get started, you normally need to think out about 3 months ahead of time. And you want to be looking at about 5, possibly up to about 9 grand for all of those just to get started. This would include your first bits of ingredients. This would be all of the knives, the cutlery, all of those pots and pans, cutting boards, knives, again, as I mentioned, sanitary items, sponges, cleaning solutions, all of those things to get started. You're looking at about 5 to 6 grand. Now, lastly, we're going to cover the POS system. So this is the point of sale software that you would need to transact your transactions. And in order for you to use a debit card or credit card or any card for that matter, you need to make sure you have a great POS system. Now, of course, you can take cash, and an electronic POS system really doesn't have a big factor to do with cash because it's the transaction of the card itself is what we're talking about. So the technology for that, if you're going to get started to have your truck outfitted for that, as well as an account set up with whoever it is that you go with, if it's PayPal, Stripe, I think there's one called Toast that also does it as well. You're looking at about $2,500 to $4,300 for that type of system. That's going to be the terminal. That's going to allow your customer to put the credit card into the terminal itself, do the transaction, and then be on their way. Some of these are also touchless free, where you can just scan the card with the chip. But you have to have some form of POS too, because it also is a great way to keep track of sales in relation to your costs. So down the road, for tax purposes, obviously you need to know how much you've spent on ingredients and also how much have you made. And then of course the difference of that is your profit. So those are a few things you need to know in order to get a food truck up and running in California. If you have any questions about this, definitely let us know down below. And of course, definitely subscribe. This is our brand new channel. We have loads of content lined up for this channel, and we've already got about 40 or 50 videos. Check out Marketing Food Online, which is our other channel. We have over 1,000 videos, and we have nearly 100,000 subscribers on that channel too, and that's growing pretty fast as well. So I'll see you guys on our next video. Thanks for watching Food Truck Freaks here on YouTube, YouTube's premier food truck entrepreneurship channel. If you're looking to start a food truck, market a food truck, or look to how you can expand a food truck you already own, definitely subscribe and check out these additional resources and videos here from Food Truck Freaks. We'll see you on our next video.